I used to believe that everything in my life was a result of fate, that my choices, my actions, were leading me down the path I was meant to walk. For years, I had been a passive participant in my own life, waiting for things to happen, for opportunities to come my way, for love to sweep me off my feet. I thought if I played my part, if I followed the rules, life would reward me. But life had other plans. The day I realized I had been nothing more than a pawn in someone else's game was the day everything changed. I didn't always know I was being manipulated. It wasn't obvious at first. It started slowly, almost imperceptibly. A few words here and there, a gentle suggestion, a push in a direction I thought was my own decision. And at first, it felt comforting. After all, he was the man I trusted, the one I thought would protect me, the one who knew better, who made all the tough decisions so I didn't have to. He was Ethan, the man I had given everything to. I thought I loved him. I thought we were building a life together. He seemed perfect, strong, charismatic, a man who knew how to navigate the world. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself in his reflection. I had put my dreams on hold, put my ambitions aside, convinced myself that being with him was enough. He needed me, I told myself. I was everything he wanted, everything he needed. I thought I was being supportive, giving, and loyal. But what I didn't realize was that loyalty can be a double-edged sword when you're giving it to the wrong person. When I finally saw the truth, it was like the floor dropped out from under me. Ethan, the man I had trusted with my heart, was nothing but a master manipulator. He had played me for years, using my loyalty, my trust, and my love to build his own success, to control me in ways I didn't even recognize. He took advantage of my willingness to believe in him, to let him lead, to let him make the decisions for both of us, all the while knowing exactly how to keep me hooked. It wasn't love, it was control. The revelation hit me like a slap in the face. My entire life, the one I thought was mine, had been a carefully constructed illusion. He had used me, discarded my dreams, my desires, and my independence in favor of his own. And I had allowed it to happen because I had convinced myself that my happiness was secondary to his, that my purpose was to support his life, his goals, his ambitions. I couldn't even be angry at him at first. I was too broken, too confused. How had I let this happen? How had I allowed myself to become so small, so invisible in my own life? But then, slowly, I began to understand. Anger, while understandable, wasn't going to get me anywhere. It wasn't enough to just be angry at Ethan anymore. It was time for me to face the truth of what I had allowed to happen to myself. And as I looked into the mirror, I didn't see the woman I had once been, the woman who had dreams, who had a fire inside her. I saw a shadow of that woman, someone who had been reduced to nothing more than a reflection of someone else's desires. But no more. I couldn't change the past, but I could change my future. And in that moment, as I stood there, staring at my reflection, I made a promise to myself. I would no longer be anyone's pawn. I would take back my life, my identity, my future. I didn't know exactly how I would do it, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done living for someone else. I would become the queen of my own game. The beginning of our relationship was like a dream, or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. I was drawn to Ethan the moment we met, as if something invisible and powerful connected us. He was everything I had ever wanted: charismatic, confident, and driven. I was just beginning to figure out who I was, and he seemed like the missing piece, the person who would make everything fit together. I was tired of the mundane life I had lived, of the lack of direction, and Ethan, with his ambition and vision, seemed like the answer to all my questions. In the early days, he made me feel seen. He listened to me in a way that no one else did. When I spoke, he looked at me with interest, his eyes lighting up as though every word I said was a treasure. He treated me like I mattered. It wasn't just his words, though. It was his actions. He would remember the smallest details, the little things I liked, things that seemed insignificant to anyone else, but to him, they were important. I had never felt so valued, but over time, things began to change. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the tides eroding the shore. I couldn't pinpoint when the shift happened, but looking back, I realize it was happening even in the early stages. The subtle ways he started to take control, telling me what to wear, what to eat, who to socialize with, always under the guise of concern, of wanting the best for me. At first, I thought nothing of it. He was protective, and I liked that. He wanted to help me become the best version of myself. But then I began to notice the pattern. His control was creeping into every part of my life, pushing me into a mold that I didn't fit into. I became someone I wasn't. It wasn't just the big decisions. It was the small ones too. I started canceling plans with my friends, abandoning my hobbies, and putting his needs first. It wasn't because he demanded it outright. It was more subtle. He would make me feel guilty for not prioritizing him, for wanting something that wasn't part of our shared life. "Don't you want to be with me?" he would ask, his voice soft but laced with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, perhaps, or manipulation. I didn't want to disappoint him, so I complied. I started to lose myself, piece by piece. I buried my own desires, my dreams, all for the sake of his ambitions. He had a vision of the life we should live, and I fell in line, believing it was what I wanted too. But I was wrong. I was so caught up in the illusion of success, in the picture-perfect life we were building, that I didn't realize how much I was sacrificing. And when I did realize, it was almost too late. The first major betrayal came when I discovered that Ethan had been keeping things from me. Small lies, half-truths, things that, at the time, seemed insignificant. But those small lies grew, like cracks in the foundation of a house, and soon they were impossible to ignore. One night, I found a receipt for a dinner he had supposedly had for business, but the restaurant was far from professional. It was a place he knew I would never go, a place I had told him repeatedly I didn't like. When I confronted him about it, he was calm, almost too calm. He said it was nothing, that I was overthinking, but something inside me clicked. I realized then that I was being lied to on a scale much larger than I had ever imagined. As the lies piled up, I found myself questioning everything. The trips he took for work, the long hours he spent on the phone, the late nights at the office. I knew he was hiding something, but what? I wanted to believe him, to trust him, but I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. And when I finally found out the truth, that he had been seeing someone else for months, I felt like the ground beneath me had vanished. The betrayal wasn't just the affair. It was the realization that everything I had believed in was a lie. Ethan didn't just cheat on me. He betrayed everything I had sacrificed for him. He had used my love, my trust, and my dedication to fuel his own desires. He had played on my need for validation, my need for approval, and manipulated me into thinking I wasn't good enough on my own. I had always thought I was building a future with someone who cared about me as much as I cared about him, but I was wrong. I wasn't just deceived. I was used. What hurt the most wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the realization that I had allowed myself to become so small, so insignificant in my own life. I had bent over backward for him, sacrificed my own happiness, my own voice, all because I thought I was doing the right thing. All because I thought if I just kept giving, just kept supporting. He would see me, would finally value me. But I had been wrong. I wasn't valued at all. The aftermath was a blur. I remember the numbness, the feeling of being lost, of not knowing who I was without him. I had spent so many years identifying as his partner, as someone who was part of his story, that I didn't know where my story ended and his began. When I found out about the affair, I was shattered. Not just because of his actions, but because I had allowed myself to become so tangled in his life that I had forgotten how to live my own. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I did what I had always done. I retreated. I shut myself off, pretended everything was okay, tried to make sense of the whirlwind in my mind, but the truth kept eating at me. Every time I looked at him, I couldn't see the man I had fallen in love with. All I saw was the person who had manipulated me, who had played me like a puppet, pulling the strings while I danced to his tune. And then, one night, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked away. Not because I had all the answers, not because I was strong, but because I realized I couldn't keep living in the shadows of someone else's desires. I had lost myself for too long, and I wasn't going to let that happen anymore. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I couldn't stay in a life that had never been truly mine. And as painful as it was to walk away from the man I had once loved, it was the first step in taking my life back. In the days after I walked away from Ethan, I felt an overwhelming mixture of freedom and uncertainty. It was strange, almost suffocating, to be free of the ties that had bound me for so long. I had spent so many years trying to live up to expectations, his, my family's, society's, that I didn't know what to do with the freedom that was suddenly mine. But what I knew for sure was this: I wasn't going to let the pain and the heartbreak define me. I wasn't going to let the betrayal that had torn me apart determine the rest of my life. The first step in this new journey wasn't about fixing everything at once. It was about taking small, intentional steps to reclaim what I had lost. Not just the material things or the relationships, but the sense of self that had been buried under the weight of caring for someone else. I started with the basics. The apartment where I had spent the last few years with Ethan felt like a foreign place now. A house that had once been full of memories now felt empty and suffocating. I couldn't stay there any longer. It wasn't just about getting away from him. It was about getting away from everything that had tied me to the old version of myself. I found a small, modest place in a neighborhood I had always liked, but never thought I could afford. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. There was something powerful in that. For the first time in years, I was living for myself, not for anyone else's comfort or approval. I spent hours unpacking my things, arranging my new home with things that felt more like me: old books, a desk to write at, photographs of places I had visited, little pieces of my life that I had ignored while I was busy making a life for someone else. But the home wasn't enough. I had to change my mindset. I had to change the way I saw myself. The woman who had spent so many years in the background, supporting someone else's dreams, had to go. The woman who had been afraid of standing up for herself, of speaking her mind, had to go. I didn't need to live in the shadows anymore. I didn't need to apologize for choosing my own path. I began to take care of myself in ways I hadn't before. I started with my physical health, something that had long been neglected. I signed up for a yoga class, something I had always wanted to try but never had the time for. The first class was rough, my body was stiff, and my muscles ached from years of neglect. But with each session I felt stronger, both physically and mentally. It wasn't just about getting fit. It was about reconnecting with my body, about reminding myself that I deserved to feel good in my own skin. Yoga became my sanctuary. It gave me space to breathe, to think, and to reflect. It allowed me to let go of the things that had been weighing me down, both physically and emotionally. Next, I turned to my career. Writing had always been a part of me, something I had pushed aside for far too long, but now I saw it as my way out. My way of reclaiming my voice. I had always written in my free time, journaling about my thoughts, my dreams, my frustrations, but now, writing became my focus. I enrolled in a writing course, something I had always dreamed of doing but never had the courage to. The classes were challenging, but they were also liberating. Each word I wrote, each sentence I crafted was a step away from the life I had left behind and toward the woman I was becoming. I also began to reconnect with my passions. I had spent so many years neglecting the things I loved: travel, photography, exploring new places. I had convinced myself that I didn't have the time, that I had to prioritize others. But now I realized that I had been living for everyone else, and I had forgotten how to live for myself. I took short trips to places I had always wanted to visit, capturing moments with my camera, rediscovering the joy of adventure. It was exhilarating to be free, to explore the world without the weight of expectations hanging over me. With every new place I visited, I felt more and more like myself, more and more connected to the woman I had once been, the woman I had almost lost. But even as I began to find myself again, the doubts crept in. I had made the choice to walk away from Ethan, but there were times when I questioned whether I was strong enough to fully embrace this new life. The guilt crept in too. Was I being selfish? Was I abandoning everything for a dream that might not work out? The fears and insecurities that had held me back for years whispered in my ear, telling me to turn back, to go back to the life that was familiar, that was safe. But every time I felt myself wavering, I reminded myself of why I had made this choice in the first place. I wasn't running away from my past. I was running toward my future. I wasn't going to let the mistakes of the past dictate who I was or who I could become. I had spent too long giving away pieces of myself, too long playing the role of someone I wasn't. This was my chance to rebuild, to become the person I had always wanted to be. And slowly, bit by bit, I began to see the change in myself. The fear, the doubt, the guilt. They didn't disappear overnight, but they started to fade. I was finding my strength, my voice, and I was learning to trust myself again. I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need anyone to tell me that my choices were right. I was learning to trust my own instincts, to follow my own heart, and to embrace the power that had always been within me. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. There would be days when I would want to give up, when I would feel the pull of the past, when I would doubt myself. But I also knew that I had made the decision to take control of my own life, and that decision would carry me through. I was no longer living for anyone else. I was living for me, and that was just the beginning. As I continued on this new path of independence, I began to realize that no journey of transformation is free from conflict. It wasn't enough to just walk away from Ethan, from the life I had built with him. The real challenges came from the outside world, the people who didn't understand, the people who wanted me to go back to the way things were. I had thought that leaving him behind would be the hardest part, but I was wrong. It wasn't just about breaking free from the chains he had placed on me. It was about breaking free from everyone else's expectations, from the life that others wanted for me. It started with my family. At first, they were supportive. My mother, who had always been a rock in my life, told me that I was doing the right thing, that I deserved better than what Ethan had given me. But as time passed, I began to feel a subtle pressure from them. They didn't outright tell me to go back to him, but I could sense their discomfort with the way I was living. My mother would ask, "When will you find someone else, honey? You're still young and you don't want to be alone forever." It wasn't just her. Everyone had an opinion. My father, too, had his concerns. "You've been through a lot, I understand that. But you can't let this define you. You need to move on, find someone new. Life's too short to keep dwelling on the past. But I wasn't dwelling on the past. I was learning from it. And I had to remind myself that I was doing this for me, not for anyone else. Still, their words lingered in the back of my mind, sowing seeds of doubt. Was I really doing the right thing? Was I really strong enough to stand alone, to rebuild a life that was entirely my own? The pressure to conform to their idea of happiness was overwhelming at times. It felt like they wanted to fix me, to put me back into a mold they thought was more acceptable. But I was done being fixed. I was done living for their expectations. Then came the confrontation with Ethan. I had expected him to fade away, to move on with his life. But he didn't. He wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. He would text me, leaving me long, apologetic messages about how sorry he was, how much he regretted everything, how he wanted to make things right. For a while, I ignored him, letting his messages go unanswered. But then, one day, he called. I hadn't heard his voice in months, and when I saw his name on the screen, my heart skipped a beat. Part of me wanted to pick up, to hear him beg for my forgiveness. But I knew that if I did, I'd be stepping back into the same cycle all over again. So, I didn't pick up. But he didn't give up. Ethan started showing up unannounced, at my apartment, at my work. His persistence became more than just a nuisance, it became a threat to my progress. I had started to move on, to reclaim my independence, but every time he appeared, he reminded me of the version of myself I had left behind. One afternoon, after a long day of work, I came home to find him sitting outside my apartment, waiting for me. His face was desperate, his eyes filled with the same pleading look he had given me so many times before. I know I hurt you, but I can't move on without you, he said, his voice breaking. I was wrong. I made a mistake, and I need you back. Please, just give me a chance to make it right. I stood there, staring at him for a moment. My heart ached, but the woman I had become, the woman who was learning to love herself again, couldn't let this happen. I couldn't go back to him, to the life that had nearly destroyed me. You don't get to decide that anymore, Ethan, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'm not the same person I was when I was with you. I've spent too long losing myself in someone else's life. I'm not your responsibility anymore. I'm not yours to fix. I'm done. His face crumpled in pain, but I didn't flinch. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to be his pawn anymore. I wasn't going to let him use my love as a way to manipulate me back into his control. Please, don't do this, he whispered, his voice cracking. But I had already made the decision. I wasn't going to let him make it for me. I have to go, I said, turning away and walking into my apartment. The door closed behind me with a finality that echoed in my chest, but I felt something shift inside me. I had just stood my ground. I had refused to let him drag me back into the life I had walked away from. And for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. But it wasn't over yet. Ethan wasn't the only one trying to pull me back. My friends, too, seemed confused by my choices. Claire, the one person who had always been there for me, called me one evening. Her voice was tinged with concern. Are you sure about this, really? She asked. You've been through so much, and now you're cutting everyone off. You're pushing people away, and I don't think that's the answer. You don't have to do this alone. I understood her concern, but she didn't understand the real reason behind my choices. It wasn't about being alone. It was about reclaiming myself. I'm not pushing anyone away, Claire. I'm just learning to stand on my own 2 feet. This isn't about you or anyone else. It's about me, finally living for myself. There was a long pause before she spoke again. I just don't want to see you make a mistake. Please, think about it. You've been through so much, and I don't want to see you get hurt again. But I wasn't making a mistake. I wasn't running away from something. I was running toward something, toward freedom, toward my own future. And as I hung up the phone, I knew that this was the moment of truth. I had done the hardest part, walking away from Ethan. Now I had to walk away from everyone's expectations too. I had to take control of my own life and stop letting others dictate my choices. I wasn't going to be anyone's pawn anymore. I was going to be the queen of my own game. It was in the quiet moments when everything had settled down that I realized the full weight of the journey I had embarked on. The noise of the world, the expectations, the pressure, the doubts, had slowly begun to fade. What had once seemed impossible, even unimaginable, now felt within my reach. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the full force of my strength. It wasn't the kind of strength that came from physical power or wealth. It was the kind of strength that comes from within, the kind that doesn't bend, doesn't falter, no matter how hard the world pushes against you. I had taken the leap, and with every step I took, I found myself more and more in control of the life I was building. The choice to walk away from Ethan wasn't just the right choice. It was the first step in a process of reclaiming my power. The life I had dreamed of, the future I had always wanted, wasn't something I could wait for anymore. It was something I had to create. And so, I did. When I started this journey, I had no idea where it would lead. But now, as I sat at my desk, typing out an article for a publication I had admired for years, I knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. I had started to build my career, not from the ashes of my past, but from the fire of my ambition. The articles I wrote were no longer just pieces of content. They were expressions of who I was, of what I had learned, of the strength I had found in myself. I wasn't writing to prove anything to anyone. I was writing because I finally had something worth saying. The financial independence I had once relied on Ethan for now belonged to me. Every project I completed, every client I gained, was a testament to the fact that I could stand on my own. I wasn't dependent on anyone, not him, not anyone. I had learned that the only approval I needed was my own. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the freedom to make my own decisions, to build a life that was truly mine. And then there was the relationship with my family. For months, I had avoided them, afraid that they would try to pull me back into the life I had walked away from. But when I finally allowed myself to reconnect with them, I found that the distance between us wasn't as wide as I had feared. The conversations were awkward at first, but with time, I began to rebuild the trust that had been broken by my own silence. They had watched me lose myself for years, and now they saw the woman I had become. I wasn't the fragile, broken person they had once feared I would be. I was strong, independent, and whole. My father, always the pragmatist, had been the hardest to convince. For a long time, he had tried to push me back into the mold of what he thought was best for me. But when he saw the confidence in my eyes, when he saw that I was no longer lost, he finally understood. He no longer tried to fix me. He accepted me for who I was. And that acceptance, that support, was the final piece I needed to feel truly whole. It wasn't just my career or my family that had changed. I had changed. The woman I had been, the one who had put everyone else's needs ahead of her own, was gone. In her place was a woman who valued herself, who respected herself, and who wasn't afraid to go after what she wanted. I had spent too many years making myself small, making myself invisible, thinking that I was only worthy if I was serving someone else's needs. But now I realized that I was worthy simply because I existed. I didn't need anyone's validation. I didn't need to justify my choices to anyone. The biggest change, however, came when I realized that I no longer cared about revenge. For months, I had carried around this simmering anger toward Ethan, toward the way he had treated me. I had wanted him to feel the weight of what he had done, to understand the pain he had caused. But as time passed, I realized something. I didn't need him to feel that pain. The true justice was in me moving forward. The true justice was in me building a life that didn't depend on him, that didn't need him at all. Ethan tried to reach out to me again, sending a few more messages, asking if we could talk. But I had no interest in hearing him out. The apology he offered was empty, a last-ditch attempt to get back into my life. And I wasn't interested. He didn't deserve to have any part of my future. I had taken control of my own life, and I wasn't about to let him derail it again. And so, I let go of the anger. I didn't forgive him for what he had done, but I no longer needed him to apologize. I no longer needed to waste energy on the past. What mattered now was the future I was building, the life I was creating. And with every decision I made, with every step I took, I felt the weight of that past grow lighter. I had learned to let it go. I had learned to stop letting it define me. As I walked through the streets of the city, the world around me felt different. The noise, the chaos, it all seemed to fade away. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece. And as I looked ahead, I knew that the road wouldn't always be easy. There would be setbacks. There would be moments of doubt. But I also knew that I could handle whatever came my way. Because I had faced the hardest challenge of all, reclaiming myself, and I had won. I was no longer Ethan's pawn. I was the queen of my own game, and I had only just begun. It's strange how much can change in just a few years. When I look back at the woman I was before, broken, uncertain, dependent, I hardly recognize her. She feels like a stranger to me now, someone I used to know but no longer am. That woman is gone, and in her place stands someone who knows her worth, who has fought for herself, and who has finally learned that the only approval she needs is her own. I have built a life that is mine, one that is free from the shadows of my past. I've created a career I'm proud of, one that I've earned through hard work, dedication, and a commitment to my own dreams. No longer tethered to anyone else's vision of what my life should be, I've forged my own path. The success I've achieved is mine alone, and it's a success that came from rediscovering who I truly am, from allowing myself to believe in my own potential. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I doubted myself, moments when the weight of the journey seemed too much to bear. But every time I fell, I picked myself back up. Every time I questioned my choices, I reminded myself of why I had chosen them. And now I stand on the other side of it, stronger and more determined than ever. I'm not perfect, and I never will be. But I've come to accept that perfection isn't the goal. What matters is that I am living for myself, that I am no longer afraid to take risks, to make mistakes, and to learn from them. What matters is that I am free, free from the expectations of others, free from the need to prove myself, free from the chains of my past. I've created something beautiful out of the mess, something real and lasting. And that is the true reward. But even more than that, I've learned to love myself. I've learned that my worth is not defined by my relationships, by my career, or by anyone else's opinion. It comes from within. I don't need validation from the people who once tried to control me. I don't need anyone's approval to feel good about who I am. I've come to understand that the only love I need is the love I give to myself. In the months that followed my transformation, I reconnected with the people who truly mattered, those who supported me even when I didn't deserve it, those who never gave up on me even when I had given up on myself. My family, once distant, now stands beside me in full support of the woman I've become. They no longer see me as someone who needs saving. They see me as someone who has already saved herself. My friends, the ones who believed in me even when I couldn't believe in myself, have been a constant source of strength. We've laughed together, cried together, and celebrated the small victories that mean the most. And as for Ethan, he's gone from my life. I haven't heard from him in months. In a way, I'm grateful for that. It wasn't his presence that had hurt me. It was his absence, his emotional neglect, his lies. And now that he is no longer part of my life, I realize how much lighter I feel, how much more room there is for me to grow. The anger I once felt toward him has faded, replaced by something far more important: indifference. I've forgiven him, not for his sake, but for mine. Because I understand now that holding on to that anger was only keeping me chained to the past. By letting it go, I've freed myself. I still carry the lessons I've learned with me every day, but they no longer weigh me down. They guide me, inspire me, and remind me that I am the one who holds the power in my life. No one else gets to define who I am. I get to define that for myself. There are moments when I look around at my life and think, how did I get here? The woman who once couldn't imagine a future beyond her pain now has a future full of possibilities. The road hasn't been easy, and I don't expect it to be perfect. But I know one thing for sure: I am capable, I am strong, and I am worthy of everything that's coming my way. I've also realized that happiness doesn't come from the absence of hardship. It comes from the strength to persevere through it. The journey wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning how to carry it with grace, about finding peace in the chaos. I've made peace with the choices I've made, with the things I've lost, and with the person I used to be. And I've made peace with the fact that I will continue to evolve. Change isn't a one-time event, it's a lifelong journey. But that's the beauty of it. I'm not the same person I was yesterday, and I won't be the same person tomorrow. Now, I look toward the future with excitement. It's no longer a future filled with fear or uncertainty, but one filled with hope and possibility. The life I've built is one that reflects who I truly am: a woman who is not afraid to stand on her own, to take control, and to create her own destiny. There are still challenges ahead, but I am no longer afraid. I have faced the darkest parts of myself, walked through the fire, and come out stronger. And now, I'm ready for whatever comes next, because I know that no matter what happens, I will always have the strength to face it, the courage to rise, and the determination to keep moving forward. This is my life, and I am the queen of my own game.